Now that I've organized my thoughts, I'm going to give a more clear and concise explanation of what I think of this fight. First, let me correct the record and clarify my statements in the previous video. Spence looked very similar to the same Spence that fought Ugas. He looked off in that fight too, just like how he did in the Garcia fight. The difference is those fighters weren't up to the caliber required to punish Spence and take away his tools. When Inoue knocked out Donaire, all of a sudden he was too old, but he had just knocked out a champion and a top contender. Spence comes off of Laos versus Ugas and Danny, but he beat them regardless because he's that good and he is that great. Spence looked off, Spence looked off, and he's always going to look off regardless of what version of him showed up. He looked off in the first 3 rounds of the Kell Brook fight. He was physically in his prime then. He looked off versus Sean Porter. There are a myriad of reasons why he looked off in all those fights, but the biggest reason and the most important reason is styles. The tools that a fighter brings to the table are paramount to the outcome of the fight, just as much as their heart or IQ. Errol Spence's bag was just the wrong type of bag to bring versus Crawford. And there's not much you can do to change that because that's who he is. His fighting style is a representative of who he is as a man. He always fights like Errol Spence, and Errol Spence is not the man to beat Crawford. The reason why Spence looked off is the same reason why Fulton looked off against Inoue. Take away a man's tools and he becomes just a man. Spence's foundation is the jab, just like Fulton. But they both were in there with the best counter punchers in the world whose timing was far superior to theirs. That's why after their fights, they walked away both saying their timing was off. It was shut off by better men. If a fighter can't get started, he's going to look like he never had a chance in the first place. Spence couldn't get started because Crawford would not let him. How Spence establishes forward pressure, how does he is the question, when he doesn't have his key to do so. Well, I talked about how he has various methods to get his work without his jab. However, Crawford has various methods to take away his various methods. He got to Kell Brook because he had extra ways to put in work. One of them, the main one being ducking inside and coming in through the duck. But each time he ducked, Crawford has something waiting for him. This was essentially like trying to get into a battle with somebody that could pull anything out of their bag. If you do scissors, they do rock. If you do paper, they do scissors. Crawford has everything for Spence, and Spence had just Spence. Styles make fights, and so do levels. It's more than just cherry picking. Why Crawford made Spence's opponents look like they didn't belong, Kell Brook, Sean Porter. No, it's greatness and adaptability. Crawford proved that. Do I think Spence looked off? Yes, but I think the primary reason isn't anything related to outside of the ring, like weight cutting or something like that. I think it had almost everything to do with what Crawford was able to do in the ring. Immortality Serum out. More analysis to come.
How can I die if I'm immortal? Monster in my eyes, I'm immoral. I ain't got no time to be cordial. Ripping up shit, I'm making big decisions. I'm feeling fly and important. Lightning striking and torching all